How could a stranger already be your husband before you had ever heard his voice? That question would change Ava Carter's life forever, but on that cold November morning in Chicago, she did not know it yet. The first thing she noticed was the soft beeping of medical equipment and the pale winter sunlight filtering through the hospital window. Snow drifted slowly beyond the glass, covering the city in a quiet blanket of white. Ava sat upright in her hospital bed, exhausted but unable to look away from the tiny bundle sleeping peacefully beside her. Her newborn son stretched his small fingers and settled back into sleep. For a moment, nothing else in the world mattered. Not the bills waiting at home. Not the years of sacrifice. Not the uncertainty that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Then a nurse entered the room carrying a clipboard. She offered a warm smile and placed several documents on the tray table beside Ava. Most were routine forms. Insurance paperwork. Discharge instructions. Medical records. Ava signed them absent-mindedly until one page caught her attention. It was her son's birth certificate. Her eyes moved across the page. Child's name. Date of birth. Mother's name. Everything looked normal. Then she reached the section labeled Father. Her hand froze. A name had already been entered. Ethan Blackwell. Ava stared at the words as though they belonged to someone else. The room suddenly felt smaller. The sounds around her faded into the distance. Ethan Blackwell. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. The billionaire chief executive officer of Blackwell Holdings appeared regularly in business magazines and financial news reports. Yet that was not what shocked her. What shocked her was the fact that Ethan Blackwell was legally her husband. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. 3 years earlier, when her father's health had been failing and creditors had been circling the family business, a strange legal arrangement had appeared like a lifeline. Lawyers handled everything. Documents arrived by courier. Signatures were exchanged. A marriage certificate was filed. The agreement had seemed unreal from the beginning. She never met the groom. She never attended a ceremony. She never received a phone call. There had only been paperwork and silence. Over time, she convinced herself the arrangement no longer mattered. Life became a cycle of hospital visits, long work shifts, and caring for her father until his final days. The mysterious husband remained nothing more than a name on legal documents stored in a forgotten folder. Yet now, sitting beside her sleeping son, that forgotten name had returned. Ava carefully folded the birth certificate and placed it back on the table. Outside, snow continued falling across the city. Somewhere beyond those gray clouds stood the headquarters of Blackwell Holdings. Somewhere inside that towering building worked the man connected to her life by law, fate, and a secret she still did not understand. She looked down at her son again and gently touched his tiny hand. The child tightened his fingers around hers. For the first time in years, Ava felt that the past was no longer willing to stay buried. Whatever had begun 3 years ago was finally coming back for her, and before long she would discover that destiny had been moving pieces across the board long before she ever noticed the game had started. 3 years earlier, long before she ever held her son in her arms, Ava Carter stood outside St. Joseph Medical Center watching rain slide down the windshield of her aging sedan. The parking lot lights reflected on the wet pavement like scattered pieces of gold. Inside the hospital, her father was sleeping after another difficult treatment, and the doctors had quietly warned her that the road ahead would not be easy. Ava sat behind the steering wheel gripping a folder filled with overdue notices, medical bills, and bank statements. The family printing business that had supported them for nearly 30 years was running out of time. Every number on every page seemed to tell the same story. They were losing. The next morning she arrived at the office before sunrise. The familiar scent of paper and ink filled the empty building. Her father had built the company with his own hands, and every corner carried memories she could not imagine losing. She switched on the lights and began organizing invoices when a black sedan stopped outside the front entrance. 2 people stepped out. A man in an expensive gray suit and a woman carrying a leather briefcase entered the building. They introduced themselves as attorneys representing a private client. Ava expected another creditor. Instead, The older attorney placed a sealed envelope on her desk. He spoke calmly, almost mechanically, as if he had delivered similar messages many times before. The proposal inside sounded impossible. A legal marriage agreement. Financial protection for her family business. Immediate relief from several debts. Strict confidentiality. A fixed term of 5 years. Ava read every page twice. Then a third time. The name of the groom appeared throughout the documents, yet there were almost no personal details attached. No photograph. No phone number. No explanation beyond legal language and signatures. She looked up from the papers and asked the question that seemed most obvious. Why would anyone agree to something like this? The attorneys exchanged a glance before answering. Their client required the arrangement for private family reasons. Everything would be handled professionally. Everything would remain confidential. Ava almost laughed. It sounded like something from a movie, not real life. Yet reality was waiting in the next room of the hospital where her father fought for every good day he could still have. Over the following weeks, the pressure grew heavier. Suppliers called daily. Loan officers stopped returning messages. The company account shrank faster than she could replenish it. Every solution she tried seemed to close another door. Eventually, she found herself sitting alone in her kitchen late at night, reading the contract again beneath the yellow glow of a single lamp. Outside, Chicago traffic hummed in the distance. Inside, only silence answered her questions. She thought about her father. She thought about the employees who depended on the company. She thought about everything she was about to lose. By dawn, she had made her decision. Several days later, she walked into a law office overlooking the city skyline. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. A conference table stood in the center of the room. Lawyers occupied one side. An empty chair waited on the other. The groom was not there. Only documents. Only signatures. Only promises written in black ink. Ava signed her name slowly, unaware that one decision made on a rainy morning would quietly connect her future to a man she had never met and a destiny neither of them could yet see approaching. The marriage became a fact the moment the documents were filed, yet nothing in Ava Carter's life felt different afterward. No wedding photographs appeared on a mantle. No honeymoon plans were discussed. No phone calls arrived in the middle of the night. The mysterious husband remained exactly that, a mystery. A week after signing the papers, a certified envelope arrived at her apartment. Inside was a copy of the finalized marriage certificate and a brief letter from a law firm confirming that the agreed financial arrangements had already been completed. The funds saved the family business almost immediately. Past due accounts were settled. Critical equipment remained in operation. Employees kept their jobs. For the first time in months, Ava felt as though she could breathe again. Yet every time she looked at the certificate, one detail unsettled her. Ethan Blackwell. A husband she had never met. A man whose signature sat beside hers in elegant black ink. Winter slowly turned into spring. Her father's health improved for a while, and the printing company stabilized. Life settled into a routine of long workdays, hospital visits, grocery runs, and evenings spent balancing invoices at the kitchen table. Sometimes she almost forgot she was married. Then a form would ask for marital status, and she would pause. Sometimes a customer would casually ask whether she had a family of her own, and she would hesitate before answering. The truth sounded too strange to explain. Months later, curiosity finally got the better of her. One evening, she searched Ethan Blackwell's name online. Hundreds of articles appeared instantly. Business magazines praised his leadership. Financial analysts discussed his investments. Photographs showed a confident man, standing in front of glass skyscrapers, speaking at conferences, and appearing on magazine covers. He looked successful, composed, and completely disconnected from the world Ava inhabited. She studied one photograph longer than the others. There was nothing arrogant in his expression. If anything, he looked tired. The image disappeared when she closed the browser, but the thought lingered. Somewhere in the city, the man connected to her by law was living an entirely different life. Over time, occasional documents continued arriving from attorneys. Annual confirmations, legal updates, administrative notices. Everything remained professional. Everything remained distant. Not once did Ethan contact her directly. Not once did she contact him. It became an unspoken arrangement between two strangers moving through separate worlds. Then, nearly 2 years after the marriage began, another letter arrived. Unlike the others, it contained a request. Blackwell Holdings required updated records connected to the agreement. Ava was asked to attend a meeting with company representatives downtown. She almost ignored it. Yet, something about the request felt different. The morning of the appointment, Chicago was wrapped in thick gray clouds. Ava stepped from the train station carrying a folder beneath her arm and looked up at the towering headquarters of Blackwell Holdings. The building seemed to disappear into the sky. People hurried through revolving doors while luxury vehicles lined the curb outside. Ava adjusted her coat and walked toward the entrance. She believed she was attending a routine legal meeting. She had no idea that one simple visit would begin pulling invisible threads together, bringing her closer to answers she had never expected to find and closer to the man whose name had quietly shaped her life for years. The lobby of Blackwell Holdings felt more like the entrance to a luxury hotel than the headquarters of a corporation. Sunlight streamed through walls of glass that stretched several stories high, reflecting across polished marble floors. Ava Carter paused just inside the revolving doors, momentarily overwhelmed by the scale of everything around her. Employees moved confidently through the building carrying tablets and briefcases. Conversations echoed softly beneath the high ceilings. A massive digital display showcased projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Ava tightened her grip on the folder she carried and reminded herself that she was only there for paperwork. Nothing more. After checking in at reception, she was escorted to a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. The city skyline spread across the horizon beneath a clear blue sky. While she waited, she reviewed the documents she had been asked to sign. Most appeared routine. Updated records. Confirmation forms. Administrative details related to the old agreement. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the door opened. Several executives entered discussing an unexpected problem. Their voices were tense. A major client presentation scheduled for that afternoon had encountered serious complications. Important data had been lost during a software transition, and millions of dollars depended on finding a solution quickly. Ava lowered her eyes, intending to stay invisible. Yet, as the discussion continued, she noticed an inconsistency in one of the printed reports resting on the table. Years of managing a struggling business had taught her to spot operational mistakes quickly. At first, she said nothing. Then she quietly pointed out a discrepancy. The room fell silent. One executive reviewed the figures. Another checked supporting documents. Within minutes, they realized Ava was correct. The problem threatening the presentation was not a system failure at all. It was a reporting error that could be corrected before the client meeting. Relief spread through the room almost immediately. The executives thanked her politely and hurried away to implement the fix. Ava assumed the moment was over. Then another voice spoke from the doorway. Calm. Deep. Confident. She looked up. The man standing there seemed familiar before she even understood why. Tall. Composed. Dressed in a dark suit that somehow appeared effortless rather than expensive. His attention moved from the reports on the table to Ava herself. For a brief second, neither spoke. Then he offered a small smile, one that reached his eyes. He thanked her for helping his team avoid a costly mistake. Ava recognized him instantly. Ethan Blackwell. The name she had seen on contracts, legal documents, and countless business articles. Yet standing a few feet away, he seemed very different from the distant figure she had imagined. More human. More approachable. Neither of them showed any sign of recognizing the truth that connected them. Ethan saw a capable young woman who had unexpectedly solved a problem. Ava saw a successful executive whose world existed far beyond her own. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. Professional. Brief. Forgettable, at least on the surface. Yet, as Ava left the building later that afternoon, she found herself replaying the encounter in her mind. Across the city, Ethan stood inside his office looking through the conference room window long after she had gone. Something about her stayed with him. He could not explain why. Neither of them realized that fate had just arranged the first real meeting between husband and wife. The meeting at Blackwell Holdings should have been nothing more than a brief interruption in Ava Carter's life, yet the days that followed proved otherwise. 2 weeks after her visit, an email arrived from the company. One of the executives she had met wanted her opinion on a workflow issue affecting a regional project. Ava almost declined. Running the printing business already consumed most of her time, and her father still required regular medical appointments. Yet something about the request felt genuine. They were not offering charity. They were asking for her expertise. She agreed to a short consultation. What began as a single meeting quickly became several. Each time Ava entered the towering headquarters, she felt slightly less intimidated. The marble floors and glass walls remained impressive, but the people inside gradually became familiar. She learned names, faces, personalities. More than once, she found herself sitting across from Ethan Blackwell during discussions. He listened carefully when others spoke. He asked questions rather than giving immediate orders. Most surprising of all, he seemed to remember details. Small details. The kind many people overlooked. During one meeting, he asked about her father's recovery. During another, he remembered a suggestion she had made weeks earlier and mentioned how successfully it had been implemented. Ava noticed these things even when she told herself not to. One rainy evening, a project deadline forced several employees to remain in the office long after sunset. City lights shimmered across the windows while thunder rolled softly over Chicago. Most people ordered takeout and continued working. Around 9 o'clock, Ava realized she had skipped dinner. She dismissed the thought and focused on spreadsheets. A few minutes later, a warm cup of soup appeared beside her laptop. She looked up. Ethan stood there holding a second bowl. He simply nodded toward the food before returning to his work. No grand gesture. No dramatic speech. Just quiet consideration. The moment lasted only seconds, yet Ava found herself smiling long afterward. Across the room, Ethan occasionally glanced in her direction without understanding why she occupied his thoughts more often than she should. He knew talented people. He worked beside brilliant executives every day. Yet Ava felt different. She approached problems without ego. She treated everyone with respect regardless of position. Most importantly, she never seemed impressed by his wealth. She challenged ideas when necessary and praised success when deserved. That honesty became increasingly rare in his world. Weeks turned into months. Their conversations expanded beyond business. They discussed books, family traditions, favorite neighborhoods, childhood memories. Neither crossed professional boundaries, yet an unexpected ease developed between them. Sometimes silence itself felt comfortable. One autumn afternoon, while reviewing documents together, Ava accidentally dropped a folder. Papers scattered across the conference room floor. Ethan immediately knelt to help gather them. As he handed the last page back to her, his eyes landed on a familiar legal stamp printed in the corner. It belonged to the same law firm that had managed his confidential marriage arrangement years earlier. The recognition lasted only a second before he looked away. Ava noticed nothing. Yet later that evening, sitting alone in his office overlooking the city, Ethan found himself staring out at the lights below. A strange feeling lingered in the back of his mind. A feeling that some invisible connection existed between them. He could not explain it. He could not prove it. But for the first time in years, questions he had stopped asking quietly returned. The feeling that something was hidden beneath the surface refused to leave Ethan Blackwell alone. For weeks, he tried to ignore it. His schedule remained as demanding as ever. Board meetings filled entire mornings. Investor calls stretched late into the evening. New acquisitions required constant attention. Yet no matter how busy he became, his thoughts repeatedly drifted back to Ava Carter. It was not simply admiration. He admired many capable people. This felt different. There was a familiarity he could not explain, as though some forgotten chapter of his life remained connected to hers. One evening after most employees had gone home, Ethan remained in his office overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered beneath the dark winter sky. A stack of documents waited on his desk, but his attention settled on a different file entirely. The confidential marriage arrangement from years earlier. He had not opened it in a long time. At the time, agreeing to the arrangement had seemed practical. Family obligations and legal considerations had required a solution. Attorneys handled every detail. Ethan signed the documents remotely while traveling overseas. He never met the woman involved. He never requested updates. The agreement became another item buried beneath years of corporate responsibilities. Yet now curiosity pushed him toward answers. He opened the file. The familiar legal documents appeared one after another. Then he reached a page containing information about the other party. Ava Carter. Ethan froze. He read the name again. Then a third time. The room suddenly felt very quiet. His pulse quickened. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the city beyond the windows. It could not be a coincidence. The intelligent woman he had come to respect was the same woman legally connected to him all these years. For several minutes, he simply sat there processing the revelation. Nothing in his business career had prepared him for this moment. The next morning, Ethan arrived at work earlier than usual. He watched employees enter the building from his office window. When Ava finally appeared, carrying a coffee cup and a folder beneath her arm, he felt an unexpected sense of nervousness. She greeted the receptionist with her usual smile and disappeared toward a conference room. She still knew nothing. Throughout the day, Ethan found himself observing details he had previously overlooked. The patience she showed others. The quiet confidence beneath her humility. The way she always finished helping someone before turning back to her own work. Every observation deepened his respect. Meanwhile, Ava remained unaware of the discovery that had changed everything. She focused on deadlines, client reports, and caring for her newborn son. Life already felt complicated enough. Late that afternoon, an unexpected legal notice arrived at Blackwell Holdings. A distant relative had initiated proceedings connected to an old family trust. Several confidential records would need to be reviewed, including historical marriage documents. Ethan immediately understood the risk. If the legal review continued, the truth would soon become impossible to hide. The carefully separated worlds that had existed for years were moving toward collision. As snow began falling outside the office windows, Ethan stood alone looking over the city. For the first time, he was not thinking about contracts, investments, or business strategy. He was thinking about a woman who had unknowingly become his wife years ago and who had somehow become the most important person in his thoughts. The truth was coming, and neither of their lives would remain the same once it arrived. The truth arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No dramatic announcement. No warning. Just a stack of legal documents placed on a conference table inside Blackwell Holdings. Outside, Chicago was wrapped in cold sunlight and the city moved through. Another busy workday, unaware that two lives were about to change forever. Ava Carter entered the meeting expecting routine discussions regarding the family trust dispute that had recently emerged. Several attorneys were already present. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, unusually quiet. Ava immediately noticed the tension in the room. Conversations felt measured, careful, as though everyone knew something she did not. The lead attorney began reviewing records connected to the trust. Property holdings, corporate interests, historical agreements. Page after page passed without incident. Then he opened a folder marked confidential. Ava barely paid attention at first. Her focus remained on notes in front of her. Then she heard her own name. She looked up. The attorney continued speaking. A legal marriage agreement executed 3 years earlier. Supporting documentation. Registration records. Official confirmations. Ava felt her heartbeat slow and accelerate at the same time. The words seemed impossible to process. She stared at the documents being distributed around the table. Her eyes moved across familiar signatures. Familiar dates. Familiar legal seals. Then they landed on one name. Ethan Blackwell. Silence filled the room. Ava lifted her gaze toward Ethan. He was already looking at her. For a moment, neither spoke. The entire city beyond the windows seemed to disappear. Every conversation they had shared. Every meeting. every quiet act of kindness, every unanswered question. Suddenly the pieces began fitting together. Ethan finally broke the silence. His voice remained calm, though not completely steady. He admitted that he had discovered the truth only recently. He explained how the arrangement had been handled entirely through attorneys years earlier. How he had signed documents without meeting her. How he never imagined the woman he would eventually come to admire was the same person connected to him through that forgotten agreement. Ava listened without interrupting. She wanted to feel angry. Perhaps she should have. Yet beneath the shock, another emotion emerged. Relief. For years she had wondered about the stranger whose name appeared on legal papers, stored in a drawer. Now that stranger was no longer a mystery. He was a real person sitting across from her. A person she already knew. The meeting ended early. Most participants quietly excused themselves, leaving Ava and Ethan alone in the conference room. Winter sunlight reflected across the glass walls. Neither rushed to speak. Finally, Ava asked the question that had lived inside her for years. Why had he never contacted her? Ethan answered honestly. At the time, he believed distance made the arrangement easier for everyone involved. Later, life moved forward. Responsibilities multiplied. Eventually, the agreement became something he rarely thought about. Until she walked into his building. Ava looked toward the skyline beyond the windows. The city appeared unchanged, yet everything felt different. The mystery that had shaped years of her life was gone. In its place stood a truth neither of them had expected. As the afternoon sun slowly dipped lower across Chicago, both understood that this revelation was not an ending. It was the beginning of a completely new chapter neither could have predicted when they first signed their names years ago. After the revelation, neither Ava Carter nor Ethan Blackwell rushed to define what came next. The truth had finally surfaced, but understanding it required time. Winter settled over Chicago, covering rooftops and sidewalks with fresh snow. Life continued moving forward, yet both found themselves looking at familiar moments through an entirely different lens. Ava returned home each evening to her small apartment and the quiet routines that centered around her son. The soft glow of a nightlight illuminated the nursery. Tiny toys rested beside a rocking chair. The ordinary details of motherhood grounded her whenever her thoughts became complicated. More than once she found herself staring at the marriage certificate she had stored away years earlier. The document had once represented an obligation. Now it represented a person she actually knew. A person she trusted. Across the city, Ethan struggled with a different realization. The legal connection no longer mattered as much as everything he had learned about Ava herself. Curious about the years he had missed, he began reviewing records connected to the arrangement. Not financial reports or legal contracts. Personal history. He learned how she had worked endless hours to save her family business. How she had cared for her father through difficult treatments. How she had quietly carried responsibilities that would have overwhelmed many people. The more he discovered, the deeper his respect became. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan received an invitation he had not expected. Ava asked if he would like to visit. Not as a chief executive officer. Not as part of a legal matter. Simply as someone she trusted. Snow drifted gently through the air when he arrived. The apartment building was modest but welcoming. Inside, warm light filled the rooms. Family photographs lined the shelves. A small Christmas decoration sat near the window. Nothing about the space reflected wealth, yet everything reflected care. Ethan felt more comfortable there than he often did inside luxury hotels. Then he met the little boy. The child looked up from a collection of toy blocks and studied the unfamiliar visitor with serious curiosity. A few moments later, he offered a shy smile. Ethan found himself smiling back immediately. The simple interaction affected him more than any business success had in months. Throughout the afternoon, he listened as Ava shared stories about sleepless nights, first milestones, and small victories that only parents truly understood. She never complained. She simply spoke with quiet pride. Watching her with her son revealed another side of her character, one that deepened Ethan's admiration even further. As evening approached, snow continued falling outside the windows. The city seemed distant. The pressures of corporate life felt far away. For the first time in years, Ethan experienced something rare. Peace. Before leaving, he paused near the doorway. Ava stood nearby holding her son. Neither spoke immediately. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. The understanding between them had grown naturally, built through honesty rather than obligation. As Ethan stepped into the cold winter air, he realized something important. Years earlier he had signed a marriage agreement because it solved a problem. Now he wanted something entirely different. He wanted a future. Not because of contracts. Not because of legal obligations. But because somewhere along the way, without either of them noticing, genuine feelings had quietly taken root. And for the first time, the possibility of becoming a real family no longer felt like destiny alone. It felt like a choice both of them might be ready to make. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago. The snow disappeared from sidewalks. Trees began showing the first signs of green. The city seemed lighter somehow, as though winter had finally released its grip. For Ava Carter and Ethan Blackwell, the months following the revelation brought something equally important. Clarity. There were no dramatic declarations. No sudden transformations. Instead, trust continued growing through ordinary moments. Shared conversations. Quiet dinners. Walks through the city. Time spent together with Ava's son. The foundation that had begun with legal documents slowly became something real. One evening, nearly 4 years after the marriage agreement had first been signed, Blackwell Foundation prepared to host its annual charity gala. Business leaders, community organizers, journalists, and city officials gathered inside one of Chicago's most prestigious event venues. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. Soft music drifted through the air. Cameras flashed near the entrance as guests arrived. Ava had attended corporate events before, but this evening felt different. Standing in front of a mirror before leaving home, she adjusted a simple, elegant dress and took a slow breath. Her reflection showed confidence she had not always possessed. Years earlier, she had been a woman struggling to save her family business while carrying the weight of uncertainty. Now she understood her own strength. Downstairs, Ethan waited beside the car. When he saw her approach, a genuine smile appeared immediately. Not the practiced smile often seen in business magazines. A real one. Throughout the evening, they greeted guests together. Many people noticed the quiet understanding between them. Yet very few knew the extraordinary path that had brought them there. As the event entered its final hour, Ethan stepped onto the stage to deliver closing remarks. The ballroom gradually fell silent. Hundreds of guests turned their attention toward him. He spoke briefly about the foundation's mission and the importance of creating opportunities for others. Then his expression softened. For a moment, he seemed less like a chief executive officer and more like a man reflecting on his own life. Ethan looked across the room until he found Ava standing among the guests. Every eye followed his gaze. The room became perfectly still. He thanked many people for supporting the foundation. Then he spoke about someone whose strength had changed his understanding of success. Someone who had taught him that character mattered more than wealth. Someone who had shown extraordinary loyalty, resilience, and compassion even during difficult years. Finally, he invited Ava to join him on stage. Surprise crossed her face as she walked forward. The audience watched closely. Ethan extended his hand. Ava accepted it. Cameras flashed. Yet neither seemed aware of them. Ethan introduced her not as a consultant, not as a business partner, not as an employee. He introduced her as his wife. The room erupted into applause. Ava felt emotion rise unexpectedly. Not because of the attention, not because of the public recognition, but because for the first time, everything felt honest. No secrets remained. No unanswered questions lingered between them. The journey that began with paperwork and uncertainty had led them here. A place neither had imagined possible. Later that evening, after the guests departed and the ballroom lights dimmed, they stepped outside together. The Chicago skyline glittered beneath a clear night sky. Ethan slipped his hand into hers. Ava looked toward the city, then toward the future waiting ahead. Years ago, destiny had connected two strangers through a signature on a page. But what truly mattered was what came afterward. The trust they built, the respect they earned, the family they chose. And as they walked forward together beneath the lights of the city, both understood a simple truth. Sometimes destiny signs the papers long before the heart understands why.